Hi. I'm curious on your observations about cyberactivism now in comparison to the cyberactivism in the 2009 Iranian elections, kind of the differences, why it's succeeding now and it didn't succeed back then. So.
Okay, I'll take the U.S. policy one. I think that's a huge challenge, is that there are so many different interests that that the U.S. government has to weigh. I mean, you have the military, you have economic, you have the support for human rights, and a lot of times we see really contradictory policies coming out of the U.S. government. You see that, major U.S. companies are providing the filtering software or the technical expertise to allow many of these authoritarian governments to spy and surveil their citizens. This is incredibly problematic. My question to Clinton at her speech in 2009, I think it was what are you going to put teeth behind your hope for that American companies will somehow do the right thing? She didn't really answer that question, so we're still waiting. I think that providing funding, obviously, for internet freedom is great, but sometimes, we're providing funding with different hands. We're giving $1.3 billion in military assistance to Egypt. How much are we going to give for democracy building? How much are we going to do a Marshall Plan for Egypt, for Tunisia? Those are questions to be answered. I think that organizations, like Freedom House, like the National Endowment for Democracy, all of these organizations, Internews, Committee to Protect Journalists, et cetera, have an important role to play because we're intermediators with government money and, assistance to civil society. And so I think it's unlikely that you're going to see civil society taking money directly from the government. But I think that, the role of civil society organizations in the U.S. and abroad who can mediate that can be helpful. And then I think in terms of the differences between the two revolutions, part of it is the willingness to use force and the role of the military. In Iran, you have a whole kind of shadow military that's in control of just, the supreme leader and the upper echelons, and Mubarak didn't have that. I think that the role of the military really hasn't been explored enough in Egypt. The fact that the military said publicly and got it out there that they would not fire on protesters, that they would not basically do what the government wanted it to do. It's very different than in Libya, where they're out bombing, and killing civilians. So I think that's critical. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I would agree. I think the military played a different role, but again, the military is sort of an unknown entity in the Egyptian realm, largely because they have not been subject to scrutiny in the Egyptian press, and so they have every reason to maintain sort of a blemish-free image in the eyes of the Egyptian public. So there's nothing incriminating on the military. And then, of course, they represented the positive side of law enforcement when they came onto the scene. Of course, the Egyptian government at the time was deeply skeptical of even its own police force. So many of them were unarmed for a reason. There was genuine concern of the possibility of a mutiny. But I think the success of the Egyptian revolution, or rather I should say the obstacles that the Iranian sort of revolutionary movement and cyberactivism faced is actually more ideological than it is anything else. Mubarak could not get 1 million people to come out and support him and chant his name, as opposed to Ayatollah Khamenei. And you've got a very, very entrenched ideological state that is capable of mobilizing in a significant way and can tap into large sort of constituencies within the population. In the case of the Egyptian government, as is the case with many other Arab governments, you've got sort of leaders who represent the lowest common denominators of their own peoples, and so they are holding on, with very fragile institutions that only pledge loyalty because of common interests more so than anything else. So the ability to capture public imagination using sort of traditional media, using television, using newspapers is something that is incredibly difficult to do. And then you also have to recognize that the Arab public as a whole and the Egyptian public as well have sort of come to terms with the fact that they've been lied to for decades. So, the genie is out of the lamp, and it's kind of a done deal. But in the case of the Iranian situation, I think it's far more complicated. So equating the two is a tough thing to do. There are so many discongruencies there.
And just to add, I think the Iranian regime was far more present on the social media networks and in the internet sphere, and they were more willing to cut off access to key sites that really prevented the organization of cyberactivism than the Egyptian government, which to me it's still mind-boggling how they completely abdicated any sort of presence in the cybersphere. They didn't have blogs, they didn't have social media profiles. I mean, really, until very recently, they had an Egyptian e-government initiative, and that was it. They didn't use any of the modern tools that we've been talking about.
It'll be interesting to see how Syria uses or cracks down on the internet to stop what is clearly an unfolding revolution there. Anyway, this has been a fascinating talk. I want to thank you both so much for your insights and your wonderful slides, and we'll be watching new media in the future. Thank you all for joining. Thank you. That was great.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it.